Hello and welcome to the session for SLES for SAP HANA maintenance do's and don'ts. My name is Sanjit Kumar Jha and I am a SAP solution architect high availability for SUSE. Following is the agenda for this session. First, the introduction, like why do we need to do maintenance and what are the reason for a best practice. Like there are so many ways of doing the maintenance, why we need to follow a certain best practice. Then we speak about three scenarios which is applicable for scale up performance optimized HANA cluster. And out of those three, the third one, the number 4 that you see on this agenda list is the demo, and that is the main content. The last one is for the scale out multi-target cluster, which is an extra slide that I have kept, that if time permits I can go through it. So let us begin. Introduction. Why do we need to maintain our SLES for SAP HANA? The reasons could be patching, update of either OS stack or the SAP softwares, like any new kernel or any new patches for an existing kernel, like that. It could be security fixes. Maybe we need to scale up or down the HANA setup. Maybe we need to remove some hardware or replace it with some newer hardware. Maybe there is an OS upgrade. It could be a service pack upgrade. It could be a full version upgrade. So all those reasons could be for the maintenance. Maybe there are some new features either from the OS side, the cluster stacks, or it could also be some new feature from the SAP side. For example, um, eh, like a new hook or new um, uh, like system D support, etc. So all these can be reason for our maintenance for SAP HANA. Now, why should we follow SUSE best practices? Like you, um, as an admin, you may know that there are many ways of doing the same thing. For example, if I have to remove, if I have to switch the roles of HANA, like there is a primary HANA, there is secondary HANA. I want to make the node which is currently secondary, I want to make that as primary, and the node which is primary, I want to make it as secondary. There are many ways, many different ways of doing that. Then why should we follow SUSE's best practices? The reasons are, like, it is very well tested. Like it goes through so much of testing, and it is proven that these steps are like, it doesn't cause any unwanted experience. um, Using the SUSE best practices, one can avoid common issues like the resources ending in failed state. That's the, you can say, the most common issues that we see, that if maintenance is done without using the best practice. Sometimes the cluster CIB attributes are not getting updated. Again, that it's because the like certain steps from the best practices are not followed. Then sometimes the CIB attribute and the SR hook attribute do not match. The values do not match. Uh, one, I should remind that the CIB attributes are generated mostly by the cluster, while the SR hook is updated directly by the HANA, the database itself. So it is important that like certain attributes which gives us a sense of the current state of HANA database should match. There should not be a mismatch. And we should also use it because there are various best practice available for different scenarios. Some of them we are going to discuss in this session. Now, before we start any maintenance, um, we should be sure that we have a plan ready. By plan, we mean that we have a defined time, like the maintenance period window could be of 8 hours, 16 hours, 24 hours, or even little more. But we should have, like, we have plan, like normally during a maintenance, it's not just the OS and the SAP. There are various other things like hardwares, other software that needs to go through maintenance. And like there is a plan, and that okay, first we do this, and when we do this, it we expect that it will take around this much of time. Similarly, the second step is this, and that is going to take this much of time. So we need to have that kind of plan. The plan can go a little here and there, but having a plan is always better than not having a plan. Secondly, before executing our maintenance procedures on the production environment, it is very uh, uh, recommended. It is very recommended that uh, the procedures should be tested on a test environment which is similar to the production environment. And next, we should have the backups of all our important data, as well as configuration. Uh, so backups are important. Secondly, so lastly, the we should have a rollback plan. Like at certain stage, uh, we expected some result, but we are getting a different outcome. Now, when we get that different outcome, we don't want to proceed. Then how do we take the system back to the its original uh, state? So, like we should have that plan for rollback. So now we are like when we have all this ready, we are ready with our maintenance procedures. So as I told you before, we are going to discuss three scenarios. The first scenario is that when we do not want the HANA database to be shut down. Means there are some simple, maybe some newer SAP kernel, or the newer patch. So we just want to do a rolling kernel switch or something like that. We like we do not want the HANA to be shut down, but we just want to do some maintenance on either HANA or on the OS side, or the cluster stack side. So what are the procedures needed to be done in such a scenario? So here I have listed it down. So we first of all, for any check, we check the status of the cluster, whether it is idle, whether it is allowing us to run um, a maintenance command or not. So after that check, we put the uh, resource, the multi-state resource into maintenance. So like few years back, we had a procedure which allowed us to put the whole cluster into maintenance. We realized in the past that that's not the like best way of doing it. We, instead of the whole cluster, we just put the multi-state resource into maintenance. Apart from the multi-state resource, since we do not want HANA to be shut down, it means that we want HANA to be still be accessed by the SAP application. And for that, the IP resource should also always be on. So for that, we put the IP resource uh, into maintenance mode as well. And if it is a public cloud, if the setup is in public cloud, then we also need to put the load balancer resource into maintenance as well. Having done that, we put the cluster like we stop the cluster on both the nodes, and then we perform all the maintenance. When we put the cluster, when we stop the cluster, then apart from those resources which we have put into maintenance, all the other resources get stopped as well. Um so now we can perform the maintenance. After we have finished performing the maintenance, we can start the cluster as well. And when we start the cluster, again we realize that the resources like the MSL resource, the IP resource, load balancer resource, these are in unmanaged state. And then we have to, before putting them back into managed state, we have to refresh the clone resource, CLN resource, as well as the MSL resource. This refresh is important because there are certain cluster attributes which gets refreshed, and if you do not refresh, then it has uh, a value which is not expected by the cluster. Like the cluster does a probe, and when it finds that okay, this value has changed during the maintenance, the value or certain the value for certain attribute has changed, and that is when it becomes a problem, because the cluster says that okay, I was expecting something else but I'm getting something else. And that is when cluster acts and tries to stop the resource and makes it has failed. So we don't want that, and therefore these two refresh commands are very important. Once the refresh is done, then we can put the MSL resource out of maintenance, similarly the IP resource out of maintenance, and lastly we again check the cluster if everything is idle. So that was the steps for the scenario where we do not want HANA database to be shut down. Next, we look at the steps or procedure where both the HANA nodes can be shut down. This is the most ideal scenario because the admin has like list risk, because uh, both HANA database are down, both clusters are down, and one can freely do all kind of maintenance and then bring back the cluster as well as the HANA. So what is the step? The step would be first to disable the pacemaker on HANA primary, then on the secondary, then stop the cluster on um, uh, HANA secondary, and then on the primary. So here you see we do not stop the pacemaker, we disable the pacemaker for certain reason, because we do not want the pacemaker to be automatically start during a reboot. um, so because when we are using this procedure, uh, there is a very likely situation where we want to take a reboot, and this disabling helps in that situation. So next, having disabled the pacemaker, having stopped the cluster on both secondary and primary, we do our maintenance procedure, whatever maintenance we want to do. And then the next processes are first to enable the pacemaker on primary and then on secondary, and then start the cluster first on primary, on then on secondary. This again, uh, mm, this order is important, because sometimes what happens is that uh, when we are patching the OS, the cluster stack may be different from one another, and so doing it on doing it on first on primary helps, where uh, uh, otherwise, so this may not be applicable in this situation because we are doing it simultaneously, but in the next situation where we do it we do the maintenance procedure on one node at a time, there we see that if the uh, cluster stack which has been upgraded on one node, and it is not upgraded on second node, there we see that we get into certain situation which can be avoided if we start the cluster first on primary and then on secondary. So I will explain that in the uh, next scenario. So the third and the main scenario that I wanted to discuss is that when the SAP HANA can be shut down on one node at a time. So why this is my main content, because from my experience and like what I see, that mostly this is the desired scenario where one HANA is still running. It is still serving one HANA node is still serving the HANA database services to the application while we are performing the maintenance on the other node, and then we switch the roles and then we perform the maintenance on the old node, and the upgraded node can then serve the HANA database. So this I see that it is the most desired one, and I have already covered half of the time, so I will quickly go into the um, demo. This all this 20 steps procedure, I'll actually it is more than 20. I'll try to cover in that time. So let us straight away go ahead and yeah. So you can see my screen where I have two node HANA cluster, and you can see that I am running it on Azure environment, so that I can also store the procedures that we do for the IP and the load balancer resources. So the first step is to put the multi-state resource and virtual IP resource into maintenance. So we can do it on the node number 2. So CRM resource maintenance and then MSL, then enter. So now we see that it has become unmanaged, this resource, MSL resource. Next we have to do the same thing for the IP resource, CRM resource maintenance, RSC IP. Okay, then we can do the same thing for the SOCAT resource. Okay, so we will check the monitoring once more. So on the IP resource and the socket resource, we have put the resources into maintenance. Now we stop the cluster on both the nodes. So for doing that, again, we can use, so since it will get stopped, so we can just come out of the monitoring, and then we can write CRM cluster uh, stop, then first on the secondary and then on the primary, CRM cluster stop. Okay. Okay, then CRM cluster stop on the primary. Then we go and stop the HANA on the secondary node. So for that, you log in as the CDIDM user, and there we run HDB stop, and we wait for it to get stopped. And one important thing that I wanted to show is that when we do that, there is a attribute. This is a hook attribute that is this is a temporary hook attribute that is created. I will explain more in a later step, but I want to show that there has been a change in the system replication connection. The SR connection changed the function for hook. Um, so normally, if cluster is there, uh, the cluster uh, does the changes in the attribute inside the CIB, but since the cluster is down, it has made a temporary entry inside this file. So this is important, because if we do not follow best practices, sometimes this value is used later on when we think that okay, we have done everything, we have done completed every step, and when we do not when we do not perform the best practice, then this value can later come back after we have done. We are relaxed that everything is fine, but it has now it then later on it changes, like it fails our SR hook attribute, and ultimately the HANA is as shown as failed. The system replication is shown as failed. So that is when I'm showing it right now. I'll explain it in one later step. Now this step is done. Then this third step, the next step is basically to do our all whatever patching maintenance we want to do. So I'm not doing anything right now, but I'm moving ahead with the other step. And so let's suppose that uh, whatever patching or whatever maintenance we have done, it requires a reboot of this secondary HANA where we have performed the maintenance. So in that case, it is also important that when we do a reboot, it is required to disable the pacemaker. If we are not doing a reboot, then disabling a pacemaker doesn't make much sense. So we do TL, sorry about the typo. Okay. Next, next we can reboot the system. Let us do that. Reboot, or maybe we can skip because I think we have only now 8 minutes left in the session. So I'll skip the reboot and I'll just do an enable back again. Enable, and then we have to start the HANA on the secondary node. This again is very important because if when we start on the secondary node, when we start the HANA, because the other procedure could have been simply that we start the cluster will automatically start the HANA because it's a secondary node. So, but if we had uh, uh, not started the HANA manually, and if we had started the cluster, which would have eventually started the HANA, then we would have got into trouble because of this. So therefore, this step is very important, that we manually start the HANA here. So we do as HDB start, and let me do a watch. So currently we see that this value is as fail. We are doing a start. So the SR connection change event that sets this value is affected by the start and stop of HANA database. So we can expect some change, like we can expect that this sfail should change to SOK. And when the cluster is up, yeah, now we see that, and this should be now return as okay, yeah. And so when the cluster is up, then this temporary value will get written into the cluster information base CIB, and then this temporary file will get deleted. So yes, our HANA is up and running. I think I have explained this step, so I can quickly go and start the cluster. So let's go ahead and start the cluster on HANA primary first. So CRM cluster start. Okay. And then on secondary. So before doing that, let us start the monitoring as well. And again, this step is important, that we first uh, uh, start the primary. I think I have explained already that this is important because now we have two different, like if we have upgraded the software inside the secondary, there is a difference between the version inside primary and the secondary. So it is important that we start the primary first. Okay, then we start on secondary. Let us wait for all the resources to uh, show up. Yeah. So yes, slowly we see that all the resources has started up. Now the next step is to refresh the CLN and the MSL resource. And before doing that, we'll have to again check if the cluster is in this state where, yeah, it's in the idle state. So we can run those steps. So CRM resource refresh CLN. And at this stage, let me show you the SR hook attribute. So watch, and not just SR hook, but the SAP HANA show attributes. Okay. So you see there are many certain values that will change when we do this uh, refresh. Okay, so we have refreshed it, and then, okay, I didn't notice, but I think there should have been some change. But anyway, let us do the same thing for the MSL resource. MSL resource. Okay, and then we see that the score had changed. If you see, this score was -1, and this has changed. So you see, these steps are very important. If we do not do this, then cluster will say that, okay, I was expecting 150, but I see -1. So they will make the resources fail. So when we do that, then we also um, uh, okay, next we have to put the resources out of the maintenance mode, CRM maintenance, CRM resource maintenance, then RSC IP off. So then the SOCAT resource. Okay, in this way, and then finally we do the CRM resource maintenance, MSL off. Let me hide this thing yeah. So this we set as off. Now, if we do check the monitoring, we see that uh, when it completes the monitoring, it is as good as it was previously. So there is uh, no failure, no unwanted experience we had. So yeah, that was that was on one node, and then we actually switch the roles. So for switching the roles, basically the steps are to forcefully migrate the multi-state resource away from its current node. Like we use CRM resource move, and then we check the role attributes, and finally we register the old HANA as the new secondary, or old primary HANA as the new secondary HANA. And yeah, so that's the second step, and the final step is to clear the migration constant. So these three steps, I only have like 1.5 minutes. I think let me try and do. So first step is to CRM resource move. So uh, I'll do it from the secondary. CRM resource move MSL SAP MSL resource force. This is important to do in a forced way. So now we have created a secondary. It is stopping, and it will promote. I only have about half a minute, but let's hope that HANA 2 is promoted. Yeah. And then, so the checking, I'll skip. And I'll just show the registering of the old primary as the new secondary. Okay. So my time is up and it's still promoting. Okay, so it's now master. I'll go ahead and register this old uh, primary as the new secondary. Um, underscore register. Name is equal to node 01. Remote host is equal to VM HANA 02. Remote instance is equal to 00. Application mode is equal to sync, and operation mode is equal to log replay. Okay, so registration is done. Now I have to do a start of the HANA, and we can do a monitoring. So it will just be over in about 1 more minute. Okay, so that is done. Okay, now we um, clear the migration constraint. So CRM resource clear MSL. Okay, so remove the migration constraint. We still don't see our old, yeah, now we see that it's starting. So this way we have changed the roles, and then uh, we uh, we repeat the same steps, like the steps number 1 till 13 on the new secondary. So everything is running on the node number 2, and node number 1 is now free for our maintenance procedure. So that's all that I wanted to show in this session, and hopefully it is useful. um, yeah, so thank you for your time. Bye bye.